Welcome everybody to the annual general meeting of the Victoria Multifaith Society. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we're holding this event in the unceded territory of the Lekwungen people, the Saanich, Esquimalt and Songhees nations. We recognize and acknowledge their roles in stewarding these lands for thousands of years. They're peoples like us whose knowledge and laws passed through generations bind families, communities, clans, nations, and all other beings into patterns of mutual respect and agreement. The Victoria Multifaith Society Chair, John Burrows, will be speaking on the theme of Indigenous and Canadian stories, new understandings, based on one of the anti-Indigenous racism workshops produced by VMS. And we'll be starting with a sacred opening with Wahinachen Elder Bear Sam, Salish Coast Salish carver from the Saslip First Nation, and he'll be saying a healing prayer in the Lekwungen language.
Pray for this day. Asa Hukinachen Chalasan Ath Husainich, is the name of Hachachal Semtana Square, is in Quinnesatla, Hachachal Semtana Multifaith Society. Quankudin Squalam and Titsawata, Hasim Shire, Hachachal Semtana John Burrows, Hachkasiam. I just want to thank everyone for being here today on this beautiful day. I want to thank the Society for giving me the honor to say a blessing. The song I'm going to sing this morning is a healing song. I think it's appropriate for the things that we're all going through, for maybe our loved ones or with the COVID and all the other things that we're going through. So just a short healing song, and that was given to me by my late Uncle Barney George, who belonged to the Songhees Nation, and the words are in the Lekwungen language. Thank you. And now I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. John Burrows. John is from the Chippewa of the Nawash First Nation and is the Loveland Chair in Indigenous Law at the University of Toronto Law School. In my 2 years on the board of VMS, John has been the chair. And everything he does is with graciousness, humility, and a deep spirit of inclusion. He listens carefully to all and brings his wisdom when others are ready to hear. John recently helped to bring to fruition a beautiful conference on mindfulness and Indigenous law that brought together settlers and Indigenous people in an atmosphere of collaboration and mutual respect, creating a vision of how we might create more opportunities for reconciliation.
and John publishes extensively and is called upon to speak by many religious and social development organisations. So, welcome, John. I'm looking forward to this.
Bonjour, de Noé Magaridok, Iji Nishnabek, Ishmarzik, Bangiet go in Nita Nishnabem, and Gabuji to Indishnamayan, Giganos, Indigenous, Neashi, Winigabing, and Donjaba, Nigigin Doden. I express my appreciation for being here today and for those beautiful words of welcome and prayer and healing. I'm really grateful. I said my name is Giganos, which means speaker. It's my third great-grandfather's name that I carry, and my clan is Nagig, or Otter. That's my family's clan. And I'm from Neashi, Winigabing, and Donjaba, which is the Portage Point. It's Cape Coker Indian Reserve. It's about 3 hours north of Toronto, 4 hours north of Detroit in Ontario. And I want to thank you all for being here today. I feel a great sense of gratitude that we can be gathered in warmth somewhat, and safety, and support for one another. And as we look out the beautiful windows, we can express appreciation for the beauty of creation that lies around us. I just live 5 houses off campus this direction. And last night when I was walking, about maybe 9:30 at night, all the owls were singing around here. And I always appreciate that sound. It's something that my daughter learned to do when she was coming back and preparing for her mission as a part of our church. She went owl calling with some of our elders. And so when I hear those owls, I know that in all cultures there's different symbols for owls, but in our place, it's just a way to recognize the importance of peace and passage and understanding that life isn't just for this moment. Life does continue on in circles of time. So those owls reminded me of those eternal circles. And then this morning I went for a short walk again, just down the path here into the campus, and heard all these beautiful birds greeting the day. And I'm always appreciative to be surrounded by the sounds of beauty and understanding the calls that they make to support one another, fight with one another, mate with one another, mark their territories. There's so much that we can learn from those little ones amongst us. So I'm grateful just to be gathered in a place of beauty. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the work that we've been involved with as a Victoria Multifaith Society. And you can see that we have an anti-racism toolkit. This toolkit was developed with the Canadian Centre for Religious Literacy out of Ottawa. This is a partnership with that centre and the Victoria Multifaith Society. And Sheila Flood, who is our Executive Secretary Director of the Victoria Multifaith Society, worked with the Canadian Centre for Religious Literacy and worked with community groups around British Columbia and also in Victoria to put together this toolkit. And you can see that there's 8 sessions in this toolkit. The human family, Islamophobia, anti-Asian racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Indigenous racism, and there's 1 and 2 of those, and likewise anti-Black racism, 1 and 2. And with this toolkit, the possibility is for groups big and small to be able to have a discussion about how some of these issues are impacting our community and things that we might do to better be educated about these questions, and then also take action in relationship to these questions. And I'm really appreciative of the work that's been done in this regard, because you can see that it's quite digestible. So you find most workshops in the toolkit that are only a couple of pages long. And what we have is a pre-workshop, which you see over here, where people are urged, invited to do a couple of things that might only take them 40 minutes to an hour, if that. Just to start to orient yourself, put your mind towards what might be introduced in the field. So for this particular session, number 5, Reevaluating Canadian History, there's a couple of websites to look at maps of First Nations, not only in Canada and British Columbia, but around the world. And you can identify places that you might otherwise be familiar with and see an Indigenous lens on that with the naming and the maps, etc. And then there was a short video as a part of this session's preparation, which was introducing Wigwasabuk, which is the birch tree in Anishinaabe, and how we think about that as sort of generating life in so many ways. So in this workshop, like most workshops, we just have a couple of some homework to do prior to coming to the event, just to start to turn your mind in that direction. And then what would often happen is you would see there's a goal that's a part of these workshops, and this one to develop narratives that place Indigenous history at the starting point and central to the story we tell ourselves about Canadian history. And of course, each workshop would have a different purpose, and so there'd be a little bit of different understanding of what was hoped to be accomplished in the workshop. Again, this is how we then gather. So there's the homework, there's the goal for the workshop, and then when you sit together with one another, you watch just a couple of videos together. And so in this case, if we were doing this today, which we're not, I'm just introducing the workshops generally, we would watch 2 videos, what non-Indigenous Canadians need to know, 4 minutes and 36 seconds, and then what is a treaty, 4 minutes and 27 seconds. So with the homework, you come, you get the point of the session introduced, and then you just watch a couple of videos together. And then from those videos, there's some exercises to engage you in larger group discussions. So in this case, there would have been 2 points of discussion, and you can see them here. One, having looked at this map, where are you in relationship to the maps that you had been introduced to during your homework? And then secondly, some questions that can then be not only talked about in the bigger group, but in the smaller groups that you would then divide into. And so again, a little bit of homework with each of these sessions, a statement of purpose, watching a couple of videos together, a large group discussion, and then small group discussions. And then when you're finished that, there's a bit of a debriefing question. In this case, what have we learned in this session? What needs to change? And what recommendations would you have for addressing anti-Indigenous racism in our community? So the point is that you can come back after the small group discussions and just wrap up what it is that you learned together in your time with each other. And then following that, there's some suggested viewings and readings if you want to do more work on your own after having left the workshop. The point of this is that it can be scaled to whatever organization, group, setting that you feel you would like to explore these issues. You could imagine doing this by yourself. You could imagine doing this as a couple, right? Just doing a little bit of watching together, talking about, having a debrief. You could see this happening in a family. Certainly it would be open to do this in congregations and synagogues and mosques and other religious settings. But we've also tried to do this in community settings with the police, and I know there's other organizations that we've approached that this can be taken and moved from place to place across varied domains. And with that resource, there's always a bit of a spiritual dimension to this, having it come from a multi-faith society perspective as well as the Center, Canadian Center for Religious Literacy. And so you see a couple of quotes here. The first one is from Black Elk. The first piece, which is most important, is that which comes from the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all of its power. And when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells Wankatanka, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. And then there's a quote here from the Dhammapada, from Buddhist tradition, in this world, hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. So the encouragement is, as we look at these things, also to see them through the spiritual lenses that we all bring from our many varied perspectives. So that's what we wanted to introduce to you, just as something that you might take into the very parts of the world that you find you're interacting with, because it's just an organized way to deal with, and I'm just going to go back one slide, many of these questions that we're facing in society that are just so pressing to us. I wanted to give a little bit more context just for a short discussion that we'll have with one another in relationship to Indigenous peoples in Canada, and thinking about reframing this question. Here's from the recent census that was just released about a month or two ago. You can see that there's 1.8 million Indigenous peoples in Canada, making up 5% of the population. And when I started doing this, I've been teaching for 30 years now, Indigenous peoples might have made up about 1.5% of Canada's population about 30 years ago. So you can see there's a huge growth in this. In fact, just in the last few years, there's been a 9.7% growth in the Indigenous population in Canada. Indigenous peoples are in the midst of a baby boom. The population of Indigenous peoples is much younger than the population of Canadians more generally. And you can see where the distribution lies here. 17% of Indigenous peoples in Canada live in British Columbia. You can see the prairie numbers there. You can see 23, almost 24% of Indigenous peoples, almost 1/4 of Indigenous peoples live in Ontario. They're often overlooked because Ontario has such a larger population than the rest of the country. But nevertheless, there's quite a number there. And then you can see the other numbers rounding that out. And then this can be broken down further. You see the Métis population there and its growth, 6.3%. And you can obviously see that this is largely a Western phenomena, although there's a good number in Quebec as well. 624,000 people regard themselves as Métis. And then 70,000 people are identified as Inuit in Canada. Of course, Inuit people are circumpolar people. They're not only in Canada, they're in Greenland and Russia and Alaska. But in the Canadian context, we have 3% in Nunatsiavut, and that's in Labrador. And then 18% in Nunavut, which is in the northern parts of Quebec. 44% of Inuit people live in Nunavut, and then in the northern parts of the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, you have 4% of Inuit people living in Nunavut region, and then 31% of Inuit people live in other places more southerly in the populations. This was interesting to me. I know you're not going to be able to read this, but I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about it, which is the census that's, again, just recently released, showing Indigenous people's participation in religion in Canada. So over here, it says there's 1.8 million Indigenous peoples. And then it talks about what the breakdown of the religious affiliation of Indigenous peoples are in Canada. So there's this, now this is self-identified populations in accordance with the census. And I have to say the census is not always received in Indigenous communities, so there's probably underreporting that's occurring in these numbers. But 1,680 people identify as Buddhist and Indigenous in this country. And then you have 849,000 Indigenous peoples identifying as Christian. And then you get the breakdown of these different denominations here, Anabaptist, Anglican, Catholic, etc. For instance, 485,000 Indigenous peoples identify themselves as Catholic. And over here, 110,000 Indigenous peoples identify themselves as Anglican. And then, what does this NOS mean again, David? not otherwise specified, so there's 109,000 people that identify themselves as Christian, but we don't know what denomination, if any, they might identify themselves with. You see there's 42,000 people who are Indigenous and identify as being members of the United Church. And then you've got a further breakdown here of the numbers of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. So myself, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and there's about 5,000 of us who are Indigenous and identify as LDS, 2,430 that are First Nation, 2,365 that are Métis, and 55 that are Inuit. And so that is just the way I read these tables. But the next page also talks about other affiliations. Again, this is the total Canadian population. So there's 828,000 Hindus in Canada. There's 335,000 people who identify as Jewish, 1.7, almost 1.8 million Canadians identify as Muslim, which is about the same number as Indigenous peoples in this country, if you think about it. 771,000 identify as Sikh, traditional religions, other religious or spiritual traditions. For instance, Baha'i is not up here, and I suspect they might be in that number then. And then those who say that they have no religion or they have a secular perspective, there's about 12,500,000 Canadians that fall into that category. If you look at then this from an Indigenous perspective, you can see there's 220 Indigenous peoples that identify as Hindu, and there's 1,615 Indigenous peoples that identify as Jewish, which I think is vastly undercounted, because when I lived in Toronto, a lot of my law students and colleagues would be both Indigenous and Jewish, and so I think that my own perception wouldn't just be the world. But anyways, that's what it says in the figures here. 1,800 Muslims, 160 Sikhs, 77,000 Indigenous peoples practice traditional spirituality, and 24,000 are other religions, and again, 849,000 Indigenous peoples will say that they have no religion or they have a secular perspective. Right? That's about the same number of Indigenous peoples as would identify as being Christian in Canada. And this number is increasing, and the other numbers are decreasing as time goes along. So that just is a sense of Indigenous people's complexities in relationship to religion and spirituality. And I'd like to just complicate this a little bit more, because I would think that many of these people that might say that they're of no religion or a secular perspective, some of those people might have a spirituality that's also Indigenous. And likewise, going back to that category I'm in, Latter-day Saint, I probably would have ticked that box, Latter-day Saint, but I'm not sure, but I would hope you would be able to tick 2 boxes, because I would also say that there's a traditional spirituality I combine with that. As my understanding is with most Indigenous peoples, Catholic and whatever traditional spirituality you might have, or Anglican or Jewish or Hindu, etc. So that's just a bit of a snapshot as to where Indigenous peoples are currently with regard to faith in this country. And again, I just came upon this recently because it was just recently released. Another sort of perspective here is you can see these are the language families in Canada of Indigenous peoples. And up here is basically the Rocky Mountain corridor. On the east side of the Rocky Mountain corridor, you have 5 language families of Indigenous origin: the Algonquian, the Inuit, the Siouan, the Iroquoian, and the Inuit. Anyways, there's 5 on this side, and then there's 6 language families that are in what is now British Columbia. So the most diversity of Indigenous language and peoples is here in the province that we currently live within. And you can see that in this map here, the great diversity of peoples that are found in these territories that we are familiar with as British Columbia. But of course, before British Columbia, there was, Silcotin territories, or Tahltan, or Dene Ke or Dene Za or Tunaha, or there's just a wide variety and breadth of people who identify with different languages, come from different traditions within this setting. Finally, our 2 more slides here. This is an index that shows greater or lesser levels of socioeconomic well-being. And up at the top here, you can see this is 0 to 49, and that's just a light triangle, and then a darker triangle is 50 to 59, 60 to 69 is the circle, the red star is 7 to 79, and the darker star is 80 to 100. And the higher score here indicates a greater level of socioeconomic well-being. And you can see a lot of those 0 to 49 triangles just really just crossing our entire country. When you move further south, you get higher levels of socioeconomic well-being. And when you're on the north shore of Lake Huron and the north shore of Lake Ontario, and then some places in the interior here and in the lower mainland, you start to get those higher socioeconomic well-being figures within Indigenous communities. But you see, for the most part, the challenge that would be there given the less secure access to food and water and employment and education and housing and more harsh interactions with the criminal justice system and the healthcare system. I mean, those are happening across the country for all peoples, but Indigenous peoples are very, very strongly impacted by these things. This is the last slide before we use these questions for discussion. Here are child poverty rates in Canada, and this is about 10 years ago, and so these numbers will be much worse than is reflected here, but you can see the child poverty rate in British Columbia here for Indigenous children is 39% and 17%, which is still shockingly high for children in this province. 34 and 11, 55%, and 16, 52%. So child poverty is a significantly challenging issue for all Canadians, but you see Indigenous peoples suffer those challenges in a much greater degree. For instance, I think it's about 64% of Indigenous kids in care, 64% of kids in care right now in British Columbia are Indigenous, and then maybe up to 90% of the kids in care are Indigenous, and they might be 10 to 11% of the population. For a young Indian boy, that's a First Nations boy, growing up in Saskatchewan, he has a greater likelihood of going to prison than to college, because 80 to 90% of the prison population on the prairies, particularly Saskatchewan and Manitoba, are Indigenous, and it's almost 100% of women who are incarcerated are Indigenous. So there's struggles with the criminal justice system, struggles with the child welfare system, again, struggles with the employment and education and other dimensions of life. And so this shows that there's work to do, and it's a sobering statistic, but it's also put beside those other points that I was mentioning earlier, where there's causes for hope because of the resilience of Indigenous peoples and the beauty and the way that they take in the world around them. So what we will just do for a couple of minutes, about 20 minutes here, is I'll just have you turn to the person beside you and talk about these things just for a few moments. What new information did you learn from what we've talked about in our brief time together? And that could be either about the anti-racism workshops and how you might think about working through that, or in relationship to Indigenous anti-racism and Canadian views. And how does this change your concept of Canadian history? So I'll leave those 2 questions there for you. And then once you've had a 20-minute or so discussion, we'll gather back more generally. And let's see. Since we're not going to be reporting back as a group, when we're finished that, we'll just move on to our report of the Victoria Multifaith Society and what we've been doing over the last year to advance our mission down all sorts of pathways. So 20 minutes for this discussion, and then we'll turn our attention to a short report as a part of our annual general meeting. So, talk amongst yourselves. Getting to know your neighbors a little bit better, and certainly in the group that I was in, I felt like I was feeling support and encouragement, and it was a wonderful occasion to have that opportunity. We're now moving into the short annual report of the Victoria Multifaith Society, and I think David might be helping us with this, and so I invite him here. And then after we have this report, and different members of our board will be speaking, we invite you to stay for some cookies and chips and a little bit of a drink just to further socialize with each other before we go on our way for the day. And so I'll turn the time over to David, and he'll lead us through these slides and the different reports of various parts of our work together.
So here's our agenda. We have a call to order, approval of the agenda, approval of the minutes from the previous year, the annual report, the affirmation of new board members, and talking about new members needed and plans for 2023. And we should be closed by 4 p.m., I believe. 3:45 p.m., because then we have some refreshments. So, okay, so do we have an agenda? We don't have an agenda on screen. I mean, we have the agenda, sorry. We need to approve the agenda. I haven't done this for a while. So, we need someone to move to approve the agenda, John, and a seconder, Aura. So, all those in favor? Against? Okay, the agenda's approved. And we need the minutes have been sent out, is that correct?
Sorry?
The minutes have been sent out.
Yes, they were sent out.
So we need also to approve the minutes from the last year's AGM. So we need a mover for that.
Yes.
John is going to move, and
I'll second.
And Jim is going to second that. All those in favor? Are there any changes or corrections that need to be done to those minutes? Okay, hearing none, all those approved? All those, sorry. We have a move that we're going to approve the minutes. So all those in favour, sorry. And against? All right. So last year's minutes are approved. And the next item on the agenda is the annual report. And so we're going to invite all the current board members to the front here, so that we're going to do this as a little group.
I see the picture that has so many people on it compared to the little group that we have here.
That's right.
What's going on? Yeah.
Yes, we put out the advertisement for people to join us today. Who knows why?
So last year was a big crowd then.
So the last 2 years we did this virtually. We had quite a number of people that gathered for the AGM online. This is our first time in a couple of years doing it in person, so that might explain why we have maybe a bit of a smaller number this time.
So the first event this year was in February, 2nd of February. It was World Interfaith Harmony Week, which we celebrate every year. This year, it was online. We had 3 panelists representing different faith perspectives on climate justice. Sharon Welsh, Janet Gray, and Tony Snow. And our MC was Baruch Mika, all from different faith groups. So we're very grateful to them for their time and their expertise in talking about that. This coming year, the event is going to be a little bit different, but we'll get to that later.
So this Interfaith Liaison Network is acronym ILN, and it's a project of the Victoria Multifaith Society. And this network is open to members of congregations and spiritual groups who would like to engage in interfaith dialogue and act as informal liaison between the ILN and their communities. In this past year, the Interfaith Liaison Network met online in February and held in-person monthly meetings after that. So after February, went to in-person. There were presentations on the new Greater Victoria Peace School, the World Partnership Walk, and board member Shirkant Shenwal offered a presentation on the Hindu religion. In September, a series of 3 anti-racism workshops began. So there was an anti-Asian racism workshop that David Batteram did, and then an anti-Indigenous racism workshop that I did. And then there's going to be a workshop on anti-Semitism on November the 28th with Rabbi Louis Sutker. So that's coming up just at the end of this month. We'd like to especially thank Reverend Terry Woolgar of the Open Door Spiritualist Sanctuary and Derek Hawksley of the Quaker Community Meeting House for hosting the IL meetings this year. And as always, these ILN meetings are open to new members. If you think you might like to join ILN as an informal liaison with your spiritual community, or if you'd like more information, just please send a note. You'll find it on our webpage, victoriamultifaith@gmail.com. Please send your request for information, or if you'd like to join, to that address, because it's always an open, welcome forum for that kind of engagement. So that's the work we did this past year with regard to the Interfaith Liaison Network.
Another project of the Victoria Multifaith Society, and that we're very proud to support, is the Spiritually Speaking column of the Times Columnist, which features about 25 multi-faith writers expressing a spiritual and values-based perspective on current issues and events. The column appears twice weekly online and in the print edition of the Saturday paper. The column is moderated by Anna Bowers-Park, who has recruited and encouraged every one of the writers. Now, the writers are from many different faith backgrounds and all ages, and Indigenous writers are still needed. The Twitter page is, for Spiritually Speaking is @SpiritualityBC, and it was started in 2012 and has 4,718 followers, which is pretty unique for public newspapers around the country, that these articles find such a ready audience weekly, twice weekly online and weekly in the print paper. Now, the articles come up when people search for subjects online related to faith and spirituality or religion, when they search for it on Google and Bing and other search engines, and these articles come up near the top. It is very rare for a news outlet to carry a regular weekly faith column in its papers, and even rarer for them to carry it on their online platform as well. The Times columnist remains committed to supporting the blog and continuing to publish these excellent articles in the print paper. So it's one of these success stories that we, as the Multifaith Society, have supported. So that brings us to the largest project we've undertaken to date, which is the Anti-Racism Project.
Victoria Multifaith Society and our partner, the Centre for Civic Religious Literacy, which John mentioned before, launched the Learning Anti-Racism Toolkit on the 29th of March this year with 55 people attending. The launch presented the series of 8 anti-racism workshops that had been created during 2021 on Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Asian racism, anti-black racism, and anti-Indigenous racism, as well as the facilitator's guide. And VMS is still involved in the rollout of the anti-racism toolkit, which is meant to be used by groups from all ages, all types, all sizes. It's very, very flexible.
We also took part in a bunch of partnerships and collaborations over the year that were a good fit for the mandate. So the mission of VMS is to learn from one another, to celebrate our unity and diversity, and to work for the well-being of the community and the world. So there are a lot of different projects that would fit that river. These are 3 of them. World Partnership Walk, which we sponsor every year, which basically involves helping them to publicize the walk. It's spearheaded by the Israeli Muslim community. That was on Father's Day this year. We had the Honoring Peace event commemorating Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is also done every year. This year it was done in the brand new pavilion in Gorge Park, the Japanese-style pavilion. So it was a really unique event, and we actively helped with that one. And the Greater Victoria Peace School, the board had a presentation by some members of the new board. This is a brand new project. Greater Victoria Peace School is just getting going this year. And they have been doing sessions on different aspects of peace, also at the same building, at the pavilion. The next one is the 28th of November.
One Spirit, celebrating our faiths together. On September 17th, the Victoria Multifaith Society collaborated with the Hindu Parashat and the Cultural Center to offer the first in-person multi-faith function at the Hindu temple since 2019. And this picture that you see here is all the people that gather for that event. This annual event is an arts-based devotional where prayers or sacred offerings are chanted, sung, danced, or played by many different faith traditions. And I was part of that event, and it was absolutely delightful. Hopefully it will be coming in again next year, and then just encourage every one of you to attend it. It's such a celebration of our diversity through song and prayer and dance. It's a wonderful time. And we finished up with a wonderful meal as well, which really added to the celebration. Board members Shrikant Chenwai and Licia Kohut acted as the co-MCs, and 55 people attended. The devotional was followed by a South Asian vegetarian meal together offered by the Hindu temple. As always, it was a very joyful time of sharing and developing friendships.
EMS was invited to collaborate with the Sorrento Center on the beautiful Shuswap Lake near Salmon Arm, and it was a one-day conference on mindfulness and Indigenous law just a few weeks ago. And several board members and their spouses traveled to Sorrento and were joined by some UVic students in Indigenous law. People in the area also attended, as well as members from the Shwepmik Tribal Council. And this was really an opportunity to help provide a catalyst for the Sorrento Center to develop a relationship with the Shwepmik people and the Tribal Council there, which I think was successful. The community outreach worker for the Sorrento Center, Vibeke Verum, organized the event and brought together speakers and storytellers to create a day that was really rich in learning and cultural exchange. You can see all the wonderful events we do through the year, and I'm grateful we're now able to meet in person, though we're smaller in numbers at this moment. You can see the varied forms that we interact with. And one of the things that we like to focus on, as we were talking about in our small group, is how our different spiritual and religious traditions can bring resources to answer pressing questions that we have of the day. And we'll continue to operate in this way as we look forward to the activities that will take place in the future. Now our treasurer, Aura, is going to give a short financial report before we then talk about some of our departing and new board members. So over to you, Aura.
Okay. That's the one? Okay. So VMS has normally operated on a relatively small budget, relying mainly on in-kind donations of venues, supplies, and refreshments. That changed somewhat in 2021 with $30,000 for our anti-racism project funded by the BC Multiculturalism and Vancouver Foundation. These funds have now been dispersed to facilitators, advisory committees, and reviewers, and our budget has returned to a smaller figures. So as you see, our expenses for the year are amounted to $10,000 and 31 cents, and our revenue total to $3,535.86, which leaves us for a current balance of $7,380.46. So VMS continues to depend on membership donations for all other expenses. So we encourage everyone to join us. You could look through our website. There is a donate button if you'd like to donate for more events and more programs. You could also join for our membership. Last year, VMS decided to make memberships free with any donation, with a suggested donation of $25 for individuals and $50 for organizations. We'd like to keep memberships reasonable and accessible for all people, especially students and other young people. So whether a donation is $5 or $100, membership is included. It's also now very easy to make donations, as I mentioned, by e-transfer directly on our website using the donate button or join button on the navigation bar with printable receipts given automatically for every $20 you donate or more. These donations provide membership for 1 year and provide for all VMS activities. We'd like to thank also all our donors here and outside of this meeting, and for those renewing their membership, for your encouragement and support. Thank you.
And finally, some things about the Board of Directors. A thank you to former board members. According to the Victoria Multifaith Society, our bylaws, the seats are assigned to members of specific spiritual communities. Now, the seats are not representative of those faith communities. They are people who sit in those seats who are part of those faith communities and have chosen to volunteer and have been appointed to be sitting on the board. But they're not representative of their faith communities. So the faith communities that we have on the board, Indigenous spirituality, Baha'i, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, and a non-affiliated seat. These are the seats on the board. And board members normally serve 4-year terms. Earlier this year, the Victoria Multifaith Society said goodbye to 2 wonderful board members, Musa Magasa and Yavel Velasquez from the Sunni Muslim, Musa, and Unity communities, Yavel. Musa and Javel had both served on the board since 2018. Musa worked on the anti-racism project all during 2021, in addition to his full-time job here at the University of Victoria in the Equity and Human Rights Department. And until he accepted a position recently at the University of Calgary. Yavel was always a very bright light amongst us, with a sense of humor and a real dedication. He added his enthusiasm and his singing abilities to many of our events. So we'd like to really thank you and warmly thank you, Javel and Musa, for their time with the Victoria Multifaith Society over the past 4 years, and we wish them all the best in their futures. Now, I'd like to pass it on to John to introduce a couple of new board members.
Yes, new board members. So where possible, board members currently serving are asked to recommend members from their faith communities to replace them when they leave, which leads to an interview process and then a board decision and then an affirmation at this meeting, the annual General Assembly. So this year, 2 new board members have joined and will be seeking their affirmation from you. We have May Shihadeh from the Sunni Muslim community and Lasia Kohat from the Unity Spiritual Community. Now May, who's been at a number of our events already, is a student at Royal Roads University in the Master of Arts in Intercultural and International Communications program, and she's also a community advocate for the Muslim community. She passes along her regrets that she can't be here today. There's some pressing matters she's dealing with. And then we've got Lasia, who's a licensed spiritual practitioner and integrative nutritional health coach with a degree in advanced consciousness studies. And she also would have liked to have been here today, but she's helping a friend who's going through medical aid in dying today. But we'd like to affirm the appointment of these 2 new members at this AGM by all those who are present. And so we need someone to move and second this. So Sheila will move this, and a seconder, David, thank you. And could we have a show of hands in support? Great. Any discussion? Okay, thank you. Wonderful to have a fully functioning board Here's again the board as you see the names and the different seats that are attached to it. And in time, myself, I will be moving along. I've been doing this for almost 4 years, and others are getting to those stages as well. So we're smaller at this meeting than we usually are, but we feel like there's a lot of strength out there in the community that continues to nourish what we're doing. And so here's that board.
Yeah, we have a really wonderful board this year. We've almost always had a wonderful board, but it's especially active and great people. And it's too bad everybody couldn't make it here today, but it was just an amazing number of circumstances between ill health and being stuck in Parksville and another one stuck in India and all kinds of things. But yeah, we will start this year with a full board, 9 members and myself. And we will be actually looking for a new person to fill the Sikh seat. Jagerberg is stepping down, so if anybody knows of somebody in that community who would be a good candidate for the Victoria Multifaith Society, don't hesitate to put forward their name. And I think Janine also is stepping down soon, so that would be in the Buddhist community. So all suggestions are welcome.
So this is plans for the coming year now. We have our annual celebration of the World Interfaith Harmony Week, which many of you will have attended through the years. This time, for the first time, we'll be collaborating with the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who've had a similar event annually for many years now. This is the first time we're bringing our 2 events together. So that's important to us. The World Religions Conference is scheduled to be held on Sunday, the 5th of February, at the Saanich Commonwealth Center. So in about 3 months from now, we'll have that event. We're also in the process of applying for a grant to continue and intensify the rollout of our Learning Anti-Racism Toolkit, and we hope to be able to engage a student here at UVic to assist us with that task. As I mentioned, there are other community organizations that want to take this into their work, and so a student that could help to facilitate that could be very valuable to us and them in having that occur. We're also very excited about a new project to be held at the Christ Church Cathedral called Beyond Polarization. This will look at some of the most pressing social issues, again through the lens of spiritual and humanitarian principles. And the project is in development and should begin next spring, but the earlier conversations that we've had so far promise to be a very enlightening and engaging set of dialogues based on the subjects and based on the people that we are hoping to draw in to lead our discussions with these issues. As you know, polarization is one of the issues that's just plaguing us in our day and age, and so if we can bring our spiritual and humanitarian principles to address questions of polarization, that's what we hope to do through that activity. And then we're going to continue with what I talked about earlier with the Interfaith Liaison Network, the Hindu temple event, and then our other regular VMS activities. And if you're interested, or any other VMS members that you know of are interested in assisting with these activities, please get hold of us. We would always appreciate help in this regard. I also want to just put out a special thank you to Sheila Flood for her continued role as our executive director of this organization. So much of what we do would not happen without her constant encouragement and enthusiasm and attention to detail, including putting together this PowerPoint presentation and organizing us in the way that we are gathering in not just this moment, but so many of our moments through the year. I'm very, very grateful to Sheila, as I know our entire board is. And so thank you. It's now our opportunity just to spend a few minutes socializing with one another.
And her husband.
And with and Jim too, of course, is always alongside there. But we invite people to just socialize, mingle, visit with each other. There's other things to say.